Okay, here's a question for now. Does the soul have weight? I mean, it feels like this ancient mystery, right? What actually happens when we die?
And for like over 100 years now, there's been this very specific number attached to that idea.
21 grams.
Exactly, 21 grams. It's often thrown around as, the supposed weight that literally leaves the body right at the moment of death.
Suggesting maybe the soul or consciousness or something has a physical presence.
Something measurable, yeah.
So today we're really diving into the sources you sent over all these articles, bits of research, notes that explore this, well, really persistent and, let's be honest, controversial idea.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is basically to track down where this 21-gram soul thing even started. Then we'll look at the conspiracy theory that popped up around it, this idea it was suppressed.
And finally, weigh up the actual evidence and the counter-arguments presented in the material. See what holds water.
Yeah, it's a mix of early kind of rough science, deep human beliefs, and a whole lot of skepticism from the establishment.
It should be fascinating to unpack why this specific idea just refuses to go away.
So let's start at the beginning. Where did 21 grams come from? It really boils down to one specific person.
Dr. Duncan McDougall, a physician up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, early 1900s. And the time period is really important here, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. You had this explosion of scientific progress, right? But alongside that, there was this huge public interest in spiritualism, parapsychology, stuff like that.
Because things like Darwinian evolution were challenging older ideas.
Exactly. People were trying to reconcile science with, well, the possibility of something more. And McDougall, he kind of thought, well, if the soul is real, maybe it follows the rules of physics. Maybe you can measure it.
So his hypothesis was pretty direct. The soul is tangible, it has mass,
Right.
and it leaves when you die.
And he wasn't just going to theorize, he set out to test it, which meant building a pretty unique setup.
Right, the specialized bed scale, apparently super sensitive, designed to detect really, really tiny weight changes.
Yeah, and his subjects.
Yeah.
He chose terminally ill patients, people right near the end.
And specifically people dying from things that caused, like, physical exhaustion. The idea being it would make the moment of death clearer, less sudden.
That seems to have been the thinking, yeah. Trying to pinpoint that exact moment of, well, departure, as he saw it.
So the procedure was basically put the patient, bed and all, on this scale, monitor their weight constantly, watch their breathing, heartbeat, try to nail the exact moment of death.
Meticulously recording weight readings before, during, after, plus his own observations. And he published this.
1907.
Yeah, in places like the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research and American Medicine. And this is where it happens. The number.
His very first patient, a man dying from tuberculosis.
Right. And McDougall reported that at the precise moment he judged the man to have died, the scale showed a sudden drop.
A drop of 21 grams, about 3/4 of an ounce.
And based on that one result, McDougall essentially concluded that's it. That's the weight of the soul.
But crucially, the sources we looked at are very clear, the results for his other patients. They weren't like that at all.
Not even close. I mean, patient 2 lost weight. Okay, but then lost more weight minutes later. Patient 3, there was a loss, but oops, the equipment malfunctioned.
Patient 4, a loss again. But McDougall admitted he hadn't zeroed the scale properly beforehand.
Patient 5 showed no loss, which he tried to explain away.
Yeah.
Maybe the death was too quick or the patient wasn't suitable.
And patient 6 was just excluded because they had to fiddle with the equipment while the person was dying.
So, yeah, that incredibly famous number, 21 grams, it comes from literally one data point out of 6 attempts.
With turn-of-the-century equipment that, well, clearly had issues.
Exactly. But despite all that inconsistency, McDougall stuck to his guns. He concluded the soul has weight.
He even did experiments on dogs, didn't he?
15 dogs, yeah. Reported no weight loss there. His interpretation. Dogs don't have souls like humans do.
So 21 grams takes off, becomes this cultural meme almost. But that shaky foundation, those inconsistencies, for some people that's not just bad science.
That's where the conspiracy angle kicks in.
Right. The idea shifts. It becomes maybe McDougall, flaws and all, actually stumbled onto something huge, something profound.
That the soul can be quantified. And that this truth was seen as so dangerous, so disruptive, that it had to be actively shut down, suppressed.
It taps into that trope, doesn't it? The truth hidden in flawed science idea. Like,
Yeah.
even if the experiment was messy, there's a kernel of truth there, and 21 grams is that kernel.
And you have to ask, well, if the soul could be measured, why would that be so threatening? The sources lay out a few key reasons why, in this conspiracy view, someone would want to cover it up.
Okay, number one seems to be the threat to materialism, to, establish science.
Absolutely. If consciousness isn't just brain activity, if something non-physical but with mass leaves the body, well, that throws a massive wrench into biology, neuroscience, physics as we know them.
Which, proponents argue, leads to things like academic blacklisting.
Yeah, the claim is that anyone trying to seriously research this stuff, parapsychology, soul weight, gets marginalized. No funding, no publications, just ridicule, all to protect that dominant materialist worldview.
Keep the paradigm safe.
Right. Then there's the control aspect. Science likes to understand and, let's face it, often control things. An immaterial soul is hard to control.
But a soul with mass.
Suddenly, maybe it's something you could understand, maybe even manipulate. Consciousness, the afterlife, that's power. Power that, they, elites, governments, whoever would want to monopolize.
It's also seen as potentially threatening to religious dogma too, isn't it?
Could be. A measurable soul might force religions to redefine things. It could, perhaps, demystify the soul, reduce the power of institutions by making the afterlife seem less mysterious.
And the sources also bring up government and military secrecy.
Yeah, thinking about things like alleged mind control programs, psychic warfare. If there's even a hint the soul is quantifiable, governments would be all over that, wouldn't they? At least that's the theory.
Potential for weaponizing consciousness. Secret research into the afterlife for spying or control. Or just preventing mass panic if proof got out.
All potential motives for secrecy, according to the conspiracy narrative.
Yeah.
And then there's just the general lack of serious discussion about it.
Outside of, movies and pop culture references.
Exactly. Proponents see that relative silence in media and education not as dismissal, but as evidence of a deliberate conspiracy of silence, an effort to hide the truth in plain sight by trivializing it.
Okay, so let's crystallize that. What are the core beliefs, the main tenets of someone who subscribes to this conspiracy theory?
Well, first and foremost, they believe the soul does have measurable mass, and that 21 grams is likely pretty close to the real figure. McDougall's first result is seen as the key evidence, despite the later problems.
Second, they believe his work wasn't just criticized on its scientific merits, but was actively, systematically suppressed.
Right. Targeted ridicule, denied funding. Some extreme versions even claim, shadowy figures seized his data or equipment.
Third, this research didn't stop. They believe secret projects, maybe government, maybe elite groups, are still going on today.
Using much better technology, presumably confirming the findings, maybe even trying to figure out how to capture or transfer consciousness. You hear terms like Project Afterlife thrown around.
And finally, the motivation for all this secrecy is huge. It's about control, keeping humanity in the dark, maintaining the scientific status quo, maybe protecting certain industries.
Like the death industry, some suggest. Or just suppressing any proof of an afterlife or reincarnation because of the societal changes that might bring.
So where do they get their evidence for all this? It's not like there are new published studies confirming 21 grams.
No, it's more about reinterpreting things. For example, the simple fact that the 21 grams idea is so well known that it persists in pop culture.
They see that as proof. It resonates because it's true.
Yeah. Or maybe it's seen as like an accidental leak of classified info, or even a deliberate limited hangout, putting the truth out there but disguised as fiction or myth.
What about anecdotal stuff?
That comes up a lot. Stories people tell about deathbeds, sudden chills in the room, seeing lights, feeling like something left the body, temperature drops. Proponents point to these as real-world experiences that validate McDougall.
And they argue science just dismisses these stories because it's part of the cover-up.
Pretty much. They also look at the hard problem of consciousness. How does physical brain stuff create subjective experience? And say science's struggle with that isn't genuine, it's deliberate obfuscation. They already know the answer involves the soul.
And the idea that scientists might damage their careers by looking into this?
He's seen as proof of that academic suppression we talked about. Evidence that the materialist establishment actively polices its borders.
Even the dog experiments get brought back in.
Right. The fact McDougall didn't find weight loss in dogs is used to support the idea of human exceptionalism. See? It's only humans who have this measurable soul.
And lastly, the sources mention these vague hints, maybe whistleblowers, references in fiction, stuff that's admitted to be very speculative.
Yeah, not exactly hard evidence, but woven into the narrative.
Okay, so that's the conspiracy side. Let's flip back to the mainstream scientific view. How does it respond to McDougall and the 21-gram claim?
Well, overwhelmingly, it's dismissed. And primarily, as you'd expect, because of the massive flaws in the original experiment itself.
Starting with the sample size.
Just tiny. 6 human patients in total. And only one produced that specific 21-gram result cleanly. Statistically, that's meaningless. You can't base a conclusion on one result out of 6 inconsistent ones.
And no control group, right? Nothing to compare against.
Nope. And the equipment, I mean, a bed scale from 1907, trying to measure fractions of an ounce, it would have been incredibly sensitive to any external factor. Vibrations, air currents, the patient just slightly shifting position.
Plus, just the simple biology of dying. There are things happening that would easily cause tiny weight changes, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Moisture evaporating from the skin and lungs, the last breath expelling air, maybe a release of intestinal gas, changes in blood distribution as the heart stops, the body cooling down slightly, muscles relaxing.
All normal physiological processes.
Exactly. Any one of those, or a combination, could easily account for tiny fluctuations on a super-sensitive, potentially unstable scale. No need to invoke a departing soul.
There's also the issue of observer bias, potentially.
Right. McDougall clearly wanted to find something. It's very easy, subconsciously or not, to interpret ambiguous readings in line with what you expect, especially with imprecise tools.
But maybe the biggest scientific nail in the coffin is replication.
Or rather, the complete lack of it. Nobody, no credible scientific team using modern, rigorous methods has ever replicated McDougall's 21-gram finding. Ever.
And in science, if you can't replicate something reliably, it usually means the original result was flawed. An error, random chance, bias, something other than a real effect.
Plus, science doesn't even have a working definition of a soul that it can test, let alone a reason within physics or biology to think it would have physical mass.
It's just outside the current framework.
Pretty much. And if you apply Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best well-known physiological changes are a much simpler, more plausible explanation for any tiny weight shifts than an invisible, metaphysical entity flying away.
And those dog experiments, just as flawed, scientifically speaking.
Yeah, same issues apply. Small sample, lack of controls, questionable measurements.
So from the scientific perspective, 21 grams is really just a historical curiosity. Interesting footnote, bad experiment.
That's the consensus, yeah.
And yet, here we are talking about it. The idea, the conspiracy. It just hangs around. It has this incredible staying power.
Which is maybe the most interesting part.
Right.
Why does this idea, debunked as it is scientifically, still resonate so much?
Well, the sources suggest the biggest reason is probably just hope.
Hope for an afterlife.
Yeah. In a world that can feel very materialistic, very focused on the physical, this offers a little nugget of tangible, almost scientific-sounding proof that something continues. That death isn't just the end. It's comforting.
It taps right into that deep human fear of annihilation, the search for meaning that lasts beyond our bodies.
And it fits perfectly if you already have a bit of distrust for mainstream science or authority figures.
Right, if science dismisses it so strongly, maybe that's just proof they're hiding something or they're too closed-minded to see the truth. It reinforces that anti-establishment feeling.
The number itself helps too, doesn't it? 21 grams.
It sounds so specific, so precise. It makes it feel real, memorable, scientific-ish, even if the data behind it is weak.
And there's always the appeal of forbidden knowledge, isn't there? The idea that there's this huge secret truth out there, and you're one of the few who suspects it. That's captivating.
Gives you that feeling of being in the know. And McDougall himself sometimes gets painted as this romantic figure, you know, the lone maverick scientist, ahead of his time, crushed by the system.
And finally, death is just profoundly emotional. Having something, anything concrete, like a weight associated with that moment when a soul supposedly departs, it can offer a strange kind of anchor for grief or spiritual belief.
It makes the intangible feel, just for a second, a little bit tangible.
So quite a journey from Dr. McDougall's, let's say, ambitious but ultimately flawed experiment
To the birth of this conspiracy theory, arguing it was suppressed because a measurable soul is just too dangerous.
looking at the kind of evidence proponents point to and then weighing that against the pretty solid scientific counter-arguments, the bad methods, the lack of replication.
Yeah, it really lays bare that tension, doesn't it, between rigorous science that demands proof, reproducibility,
and that deep, persistent human yearning for meaning, for something beyond the purely physical, often mixed with a healthy dose of skepticism about what authorities tell us.
And this whole story, this whole 21-gram idea, it really speaks directly to your own deep-seated hopes, maybe fears about life, death, what it all means to be human.
Which kind of leaves us and you with the final thought to chew on. Is this 21-gram soul just an old scientific ghost story, a footnote based on bad data, easily explained away by biology and Occam's razor?
Or could the very fact that this legend persists, that the number won't die, that the dismissal is sometimes so fierce, could that possibly hint at something deeper, something unsettling about consciousness, about reality itself, that maybe someone somewhere really doesn't want you to know?